Hi, I'm Whitney Friedlander. I'm an entertainment journalist based in Los Angeles, and thank you for joining me today for the PGA's conversation with the cast and creators of The Great. With me today are Tony McNamara, who's the showrunner and executive producer, Marian MacGowan, who is an executive producer, Elle Fanning, who is the star who plays Catherine the Great and is also an executive producer, and Nicholas Hoult, who plays Peter, not the Great, but Peter the Third, and an executive producer as well. Thank you guys. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for giving us such a lovely way to toast Molotov, Moscow Mules and Molotov cocktails for season 2.
Welcome. Wish I had one.
We all need one right now.
What a Molotov cocktail!
I could use a Molotov cocktail for this, just to end this entire year.
To light this technology on fire.
Right. So, that was actually one of the questions. What it was for Tony and Marianne was the idea of including words like Molotov and Velcro, and last year a joke about Chernobyl in a show that is, about an empress that could be very, very serious. So talk about just finding the language and having fun with something like this and playing against, what we associate Russia with, and maybe even against modern shows like The Americans have taught us.
I guess it's just, fun. It's funny and fun to come up with these kind of things, and it's part of the anachronistic nature of the show that we're always making very fun, very on purpose mistakes so that people don't think we're trying to be historically accurate, and we're just playing with history a little bit more than most shows do, I suppose. Usually, and always for a purpose. It always suits. We don't sort of find them, and it's usually we find the character story and what we want to tell, and in the telling of that and building the world for that story, we just drag in things that we think are funny or interesting, or were of the era, or they're a comment from this period on, or.
And is this was ever meant to be an antithesis to what Michael Hirst did and Neil Jordan did, where they kind of make soap operas out of the Tudors or the Borgias?
No, it wasn't really the antithesis. Well, we weren't really reacting against anything. It was more what would be a show? I don't know. It's like anything I write, or most writers, I assume. It's just what would I want to see? How would I want to see a show about Catherine the Great, and what would be fun, and what would be an interesting way to tell this story that's a bit stylistically interesting, and so that it's fun for us to write it, it's fun for us to play it and make it, and so a lot of it's to do with that in a way. It's what's in the writer's room, and with Marian and I, it's it's what would be fun, and maybe this, and so yeah, I guess that's how we look at it.
The other aspect of it is what happens with those little ideas like the Molotov and the Velcro and all those things is that they, sort of paradoxically connect you with the past. There's this sort of the way in which they respond. It sort of joins together. There's several centuries between our story and the Americans, for instance, but those little kind of historical facts or ideas, they help you connect back to the past and help you and help the audience see it in a different context.
How much of this also was just about clearing Catherine the Great's name so that we don't just know her as the lady with the horse?
Entire purpose of exercise.
Well, initially when I wrote the play, that was part of the sort of so I was surprised how that's what I knew her for, but then I discovered what she'd done and what she tried to do, and so that seemed insane that someone could do so much in their life and it all be reduced to this salacious headline. So there was part of that. That's why we keep playing with the horse, so to speak. We keep playing with that idea and that joke, and that it's like a bad rumor, and that it's suddenly in season 2 it takes off a bit, and she can't put it back in the stable, so to speak, but she doesn't know that yet, so it's sort of fun in that way.
Were there also aside from the horse joke, which has carried on from season 1 to season 2, were there other takeaways from season 1 into season 2 that you wanted to make sure were clear?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really liked where we ended season 1, and I felt like we wanted a bit of a jump in time because we wanted some fighting to have happened, and but I sort of really liked where they all were, and then to see how she was after she'd fought for a few months, and then to see how Peter was sort of reacting to being in a war was unexpected and sort of casual. So I kind of like the idea of bringing forward the pregnancy and that they were parents, and that was a big part of the end of season 1 and a big part of the start of season 2, and obviously a big part of season 2. So yeah, that was the big one we knew we had to carry forward.
And Elle and Nick, you guys are both executive producers on the show, and Nick, it's your first year as an executive producer on the show. So can you talk about what your roles are, both as, I mean, I don't know how you have the time to do both, but to be both the stars and executive producers of a series like this?
I'm just trying to watch Elle and see what she does because she's very good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can talk about what you actually do, Elle, because you're like the pro at it.
No, I think, I mean, obviously, Tony, this was a play and a vision, for this to be possibly become a feature film, then ultimately a TV show. And Marian and Tony had been working on this idea and story and putting it together for many years before. And Tony came to me and thought of me for Catherine, which was really the ultimate gift of really one of the biggest gifts of my life, I would say. And from there, we kind of knew it was going to be a show, and then we had to pitch it out to, the different places, and Hulu ended up being our home in that. So that was kind of the first season. And I was definitely warming up to the idea of being someone that was behind the camera. I think when you're a young actor, I should just speak for myself, but I feel, because I grew up on sets, I saw the machinery kind of behind the shiny object. And I've always wanted to be a part of that. And I'm just interested in how it all comes together and the creative side of that and the details of it and kind of the minutia that makes everything work. So getting to come on board and then letting them kind of teach me also, I think, how that works, and be on calls that I wouldn't normally be on. And, the season 1 was definitely, I kind of sat back a little bit more and was growing. I think I've talked about this before, but I feel like Catherine and we were very much the same. My voice was growing in the same ways hers was. And then season 2, I got a little bit more power and maybe at times voiced it too much, or was a little louder about edits, or, there's so much that goes into it, but, getting to watch dailies and the tone of the show, I think, is like a tightrope that we're all constantly walking. And we have a lot of new directors that come in and teaching them kind of the tone of the show. And because now it's season 2, it's like we figured out our sweet spot, I think. So I think for me, my role was getting everyone on the same page in a way, or like working with the directors and to kind of, all right, this is our world, like, and showing them around of how it looks and kind of how we go about things. And we have certain rules that we like to do of shooting, the close-ups first, or letting, it's very actor driven. So, and Tony and Marian really create that on the set of kind of prepping everyone to know it's very actor driven, scene driven. There's a lot of dialogue here. And in order to get the best outcome, this is what we need to do. So it's basically making sure our rules are enforced with new people that come on set. And making, I don't know. Season 2 just felt like DP wise, like the look of the show, it's really like elevated. Like and to think that we all did it during COVID is like, it's astonishing because it's so gorgeous. Like putting together Because then, yeah, putting together these people, like all these creative minds that, you know, we've all put together is like, it's really, that's a gift, you know, for especially Tony and Marian interviewing people and putting them all together. It's like, wow, they are the right people for the show, which, you know, a lot of people don't, you know, they might not understand the show completely. They want to do like the, you know, BBC period drama. It's like, well, no, you can take some risk here, you know? So it's like getting them to shake them up. I don't know. I talk a lot.
Nick, did you want to add anything from your experiences?
No. I feel like I'm like the step behind Elle. So like I'm learning it and then like, yeah. So I'm like listening there. I'm like, okay, great. All right. That'll be, if we get to do a third, I'll be like, all right, it's good for me to watch and learn from everyone else. So that was a good insight for me.
I mean, you grew up on sets too. So did you learn anything like during your childhood, during your previous experiences that you brought to this?
You know, in terms of that, it's like always primarily the focus is the acting and the character first. I think the fun thing for Elle and I is that we work in very similar ways because of that, because of our backgrounds. And we recently discovered that we have a psychic connection, that I managed to guess Elle's birthday out of thin air, which was quite impressive. But there's like this thing whereby I think it's just the older you get and the more you've been on sets and the more you understand what you like and how good stuff's created, the more that you want to be able to voice your opinions on that perhaps, but also just keep learning from Tony and Marian and Elle and everyone and be like, okay, figure it out so that going forward, if continue to produce anything, you can kind of be like, see what the sweet spot is of, getting the right creatives or pushing story in the right direction.
I mean, for both of you, would this make you want to do more directing or more producing on other projects that you might not be starring in?
Yeah, yes, definitely. I'm producing this show that we're doing now. And I want to direct very badly. So I don't know, I will, but one day.
Elle, you mentioned that you were filming in COVID. What were the challenges for all of you to be able to make a show like this that's so grand when you're all wearing masks and doing tests of your nose every week or so?
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, you guys, I don't know, Tony, Marian, you guys can talk about this. I mean, it was right in the thick of it. Something that I loved was that obviously we have a lot of background in the first season, you know, and a lot of those same faces came back, and we kind of had our own background that were a part of the like our core like cast. And I'm like, even if it's not, I think that was partly because of COVID, but I was like, even if it's not COVID, I want to do that again, because I loved they're like a part of our group, and they had like their own character names, and they created their own families. Like you can, like, they are so into it, and it's like makes the court so alive. So that was something that I want to keep doing. I love them.
It was good. It was COVID driven. We were trying to control our crowd so they didn't go and work on other shows. And but it did help the court feel like, oh, this is the court. They're the same people every day. It was cool.
And you also filmed on real sets this season, which was different than what you did in season 1, correct?
The pilot was locations, and then we built sets after that. So we were revisiting the sets, but we sort of expanded and changed and refocused on different aspects of the sets this time around. But we also used locations sort of around London for our exteriors and things like that. So we do sort of a mixture of those two things.
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of research did you do to even figure out, you know, working with a production designer and working with everyone behind the scenes, to figure out what Russia would have looked like back then?
Well, we kind of like went from, I think originally the brief to Fran and Francesca was it's Russia, and you can go off that and that era, but the main thing to go off is it's Peter's Palace, and it's more Peter's Palace than it is Russia. So it was kind of, that was the brief. It was like, create a world that he has. Like, it's debaucherous and the things are broken, and it's not like, you know, it's beautiful, but it's sort of not in some level. So often it's this sort of conversation between, you know, we work a lot together on how to build things and how to make things look, and So it was sort of that. It was the same thing with the whole, like Elle says, this tonal tightrope we all walk was it. All the conversations are generally around why are we doing it? How does it fit the world of the show? How does it fit the tone of the show? Is it too far? Do we care? Let's try and see how far is too far, so it just depends, and that's a constant with all the designers. Every kind of costume, everything we talk about is how does it kind of marry up the two worlds, and the designers do all the research of what it would have been more or less of that era, and then they riff on that. Then we go off on that, and we will kind of bring in, things. Even with Sharon and costume, it's like we can give a very contemporary reference and she can meld those two things, so we can say a Gucci 1970s thing and she can meld that into some sort of Russian thing, so there's a bit of that going on all the time because that is what the whole show is. It's a meshed contemporary meets period thing. So we're always trying to find how that meshes in a really organic way. But, yeah.
And also how it speaks to character, too. That's always sort of what's going to help the cast and the actors to realise their characters, enhance them.
So do you think about at all the parallels to Real World Society? Like, obviously, this season opens with a coup and America just had a coup. Nick has said before that, like, people have compared his character to Donald Trump. We have last season there was the whole issue of Catherine explaining inoculations to people, and there was a plague.
That turned out to be different. Yeah.
Do you think about it all about like how real the show still is? How it's not necessarily just all history.
No, of course, and we're conscious of what's going on. But I think what I discover all the time is like politically, we go in circles as a humanity. The things they were dealing with, like vaccination, and which we wrote well before the pandemic, obviously. That was a big issue then, and then and now it's a big issue. 400 years later, it's a big issue, and it's sort of similarly someone losing power and refusing to accept it. It's sort of these things just kind of keep going around, which is sort of part of why the show's a bit of a tragicomedy, I guess. And then people come in who really want to make change, like Catherine. And then it is like, I guess the show's discussing how do you make change in a really entrenched world, and how do you progress, and what are the obstacles? And so we're conscious that we're writing a show now, and because we're all sort of political people on some level, it does have a parallel, and we try not to make it too literal, but just really aware of. We don't like feed off the present, but it's just because we live in the present, it seems to be infecting the show. And partly also there's always been leaders like Peter, and there's always been people who've tried to change things. And there's been that tension between the two for, 1,000 years. So the show's just sort of exploring that, I guess.
Yeah, and you can't sort of write in a vacuum either. And there's always a zeitgeist, whether you're conscious of the headlines or not. Everything seeps into. It's just we live in this world.
And I think that's what's funny about the show as well. As well as a writer, it's funny when you write something, and then like we wrote the inoculation episode, and then we delivered it like the day the pandemic. It started was when we delivered it to Hulu, and they were like, "Holy shit, just put this to air today." And then with like the coup in the I don't want to give up power thing, we'd already shot that episode, and that happened. And so you're a bit like, well, I guess as Marian says, you don't live in a vacuum, and as a writer, you suck it all in, and it comes out in its way. But often it's weird how the show's slightly ahead of. Like we write and produce it, and then stuff happens, and you're like, oh, it was really like weirdly prescient, which is not prescient. It just feels to me like as a society, we're constantly trying to solve these problems and getting a little bit further and not enough, far enough, and people are who they are,
Well, Nick, since you can predict Elle's birthday, could you also try to predict the future of politics and what's going on with the vaccine right now?
Well, I was just saying, since the show seems to have a good prediction rate, we should write some really nice utopian future for if we do season 3.
One's gonna get fucked out the window.
That would be amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean,
Not
for both of you,
right.
I mean, yeah, just for both of you, were you looking at any politicians like in current or past history when you were developing your characters?
Not really. I mean, not really. I mean, I think the Peter's character there's lots of sort of man-child presidents and, you know, still is and always have been. And, you know, and I'm a big politics fan and Marian's a big politics fan. So I'm sure it's just part of the conversation. And it was sort of why I changed the actual what Peter was really like to what he became in the show, because it seemed a more, I don't know, he just seemed a better antagonist and a more like there's still a lot of dictators around and people so it just seemed like a good person to try to talk about and deal with. And yeah.
I mean, Nick, is it fun to play a mostly complete moron all day long?
Whoa.
I think in many ways he is emotionally and can be buffoonish and moronic in moments, but there's also like at times like a deep-rooted intelligence about him as well, and kind of an awareness, and he also has I think that one of the things between Peter and Catherine is his ability to kind of, because he's been in power and understands this court and Russia so well and has grown up around it, there's also an ability for him to predict and know what the outcomes are and how people are. I think that's one of the things that he's very truthful and honest actually in all he says. It's not always what you want to hear, but I think that's the thing that sometimes is quite an attractive quality perhaps to him for Catherine, is that, you know, he can actually give good advice in terms of what the outcome might be of certain scenarios. So, you know, obviously it's fun to play the moronic side and the silly side, but there's also a lot more depth to it, which Tony kindly puts in for me.
You go home at the end of the day and just feel like so smart. You're like, I am so much smarter than that guy. Like, I can open this pickle jar without anyone's help.
And then I can't open the pickle jar.
And then you
like,
can't
God damn. No, I don't feel that.
I can figure out how to call an Uber all by myself without anyone helping me.
Yeah.
I mean, Elle, also, I mean, on that note, do you feel like, especially because, you know, you are an executive producer, you are the star, have you felt like your confidence grow a little bit as a performer since you started doing this?
I have. It's weird because I think the second season, and Nick and I have talked about this a little bit, but I think because of the pandemic and the whole cast, we'd been, you know, obviously at home, all kind of sequestered for a long time. So I think we were all kind of raring to go, like, you know, horses at a race, or just like, let's go, like, let's perform again, let's dress up with our friends. And we hadn't really been to a party like in a while. So we're like, all right, we have parties on the show. Like, let's just have a party with ourselves. And so every day felt very alive because we obviously with like restrictions and stuff, we didn't get to do much. And so being on the show was our social time, and also where we got to kind of show off what we had been marinating during the pandemic, if that makes sense. Me, at least, I felt that way. Like I was thinking a lot about Catherine, I don't know, like after season 1 and where she, you know, what else I could add to her. And yeah, this whole, like these 2 seasons have just helped. I just feel like, especially season 2, I was like, I felt like a physical feeling of like growing as an actor. It's very hard to describe, but I just felt like something clicked, or like, oh, right, I think I understand it more. I felt looser or just freer to do, like, to try things out. Like it was interesting. I guess it's part of growing up, but this whole experience is very, very special. I know that and I don't think I realized that when you sign on to something, you'll never know. But then this happened. I'm like, wow, this like character is going to mark my life and like career forever. Like I know that, I genuinely know that. So I just love this show.
Yeah, and for anyone who wants to answer as we start to wrap up, what do you think about this trend right now that we're seeing about like these anachronistic history shows like this, or Bridgerton, which is based on a book but set in a period, and or Dickinson or Underground? Like, how do you feel about these kind of shows?
There's always been shows like, I mean, well, not shows, I guess, but it's like Marie Antoinette, like what's the one, the Barry Lyndon, right? I mean, there's like, we've seen it. Orlando. Or,
yeah, I think so. Orlando, yeah, great. I think, I mean, I don't, obviously I don't think the purpose of these shows is to teach history. I think it's not what they're about. I think that's like, okay, that's interesting. I'll go and look up what Catherine the Great was sort of exactly about. No, I think it was a genre that I guess was overdue for a bit of refreshment. And people can talk about it's also hard to talk about the present at the moment in some ways because it's so complicated and it's so riven with division and all that kind of stuff. So I think writing contemporary shows is possibly harder in a way, depending what you want to talk about. But I guess in period shows you get to talk about stuff, and because it's cast back in time, it's you get to do it in a much freer way and with a sort of joy and a kind of like irreverence, and I don't know, it seems more acceptable to talk about this stuff in contemporary stuff in a period show than it does if you were talking about it in a contemporary show. Everyone get pissed off, no matter what you did. So
also, it's sort of the opposite of the science fiction idea, because if you tell a science fiction story, you go forward and you get to distance your audience from that. But this way, it's just going the other way, but it's essentially doing the same thing. Allowing the audience to separate themselves from their own contemporary perception and see it with a bit of objectivity. I think that's the advantage of it.
And
we're going to do a science fiction version of this next.
And just one last question. I know there's no news on season 3 yet, but if there were there any characters in particular you'd like to bring in? Like, I do think it's really funny that like Voltaire is just randomly walking around the castle.
We love Voltaire.
Yeah, we think it's funny too. Yeah, it is funny. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's what is great about that period of history. It's nice to have Voltaire, and you can have a lot of different people. So, no, I have got a few ideas around such things, but hopefully we'll get to do it again and we'll find out.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.